Morning. I'm Julie Kushner, State Senator and co-chair of the Labor and Public Employees Committee. And I want to welcome you today to the task force to study cancer relief benefits for firefighters. And it's good to see all our task force members here today with us. I will open the meeting first to welcoming remarks by my co-chair, Representative Porter.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and hello to our folks out in TV land or YouTube land that is watching. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I say let's get started.
Great, thank you. And I see Ranking Member from the House, Representative Aurora. Do you have any comments you'd like to share?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I welcome everyone and look forward to the conversations. As you see, I'm in the driver's seat here, so I'll be a little more in the listen mode, and looking forward to constructive conversations here. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Senator Sampson is Ranking Member, who I believe is tied up with other Senate business at the moment. So if he joins us later, I'll give him an opportunity to say a few words. I do want to welcome and acknowledge Jeff Tomchik. Jeff is here today representing one of his colleagues who's a member of the task force, Bob Smith, who was unable to attend today. So Jeff, it's good to have you here, and look forward to any input you might have today or in the future. So with that, I want to get started on our agenda today. I know we did have a request from Mr. Adamson to be on the agenda. You'll see him listed there. But Bill, I would like to ask if you would hold until after the presentation that we've planned for today. So we will first start with the presentation by Attorney Drapeau about workers' compensation and how it might address the needs of our firefighters with regard to cancer. I do want to say that workers, and I see Attorney Morrissey is here as well, and I know you're going to be joining in this conversation. I think workers' comp is sometimes a bit confusing to folks who haven't had direct experience with it or worked with it extensively. And so it seemed important to first understand, how it works, what the problems are for firefighters who are living with cancer, and what the problems are for firefighters' families when a firefighter dies from the injuries, from the disease. And so I really appreciate your being here. I think, we'll start with your presentation, and then I assume there'll be a number of questions that we'll have to really make sure that we have a thorough understanding of what the options are. So with that, I will turn it over to the attorneys.
Thank you, Senator. Obviously, this task force was established to investigate the adequacy of 7-313J and the feasibility and implications of a workers' comp statute. There was some talk about having us draft some legislation, and while that certainly may be putting the cart before the horse, I took the liberty of drafting something which is largely based on 7-313J. And let me go through what the alterations to the 7-313J are. What it does is it essentially establishes a rebuttable presumption for firefighters who have the cancers listed in 313J. And this presumption can only be rebutted by clear and convincing evidence of the items listed in 313J. And what it does is 313J provides a laundry list of ways to rebut the presumption. And the advantage here is my concern all along with the workers' comp system hasn't really been the cost, although that's certainly a concern. It's been the delay. And it's not the delay through the fault of the commission, it's the delay in the nature of a cancer case, which ends up being a battle of medical experts. By this statute or proposed bill, what it does is it removes the battle of the doctors, which is what causes the delay. And it simply says if you have one of these listed cancers, you are eligible for this presumption. It can be rebutted if it's shown, for example, that you've been a smoker within the last 15 years. And you might say, well, how are you going to prove someone's been a smoker in the last 15 years? And that's a lot simpler than you might think. It's simply dental records, right? That's usually how that's shown. There were some other alterations to 313J in subsection B3. It says such firefighter has used cigarettes as defined in 12-285 or any other tobacco products as defined in 12-330A within 15 years of, and 313J has applying for benefits. I changed that to the diagnosis because in workers' comp, that's what we're used to dealing with, the date of diagnosis. I should say too, I skipped over this, in the fourth line of subsection B, really the first, it opens with notwithstanding any provision of chapter 568, which is the Workers' Comp Act, or any other general statute, charter, special act, or ordinance to the contrary, a firefighter's diagnosis of cancer shall be presumed to arise out of and in the course of employment as the result of exposures peculiar to duties performed as a firefighter. Why that language is important, the peculiar to duties performed as a firefighter, is that makes it an occupational disease under workers' comp and provides a 3-year statute of limitations rather than the standard 1-year statute of limitations. So that's why that language was changed and added in, which is very important, quite frankly, especially in a cancer case. So those were some of the changes that were made. Subsection C was left in 7-313J. I'm not so sure that that would be necessary. That states that if you're no longer an active firefighter, you still can file a claim within 5 years. I'm not so sure that needs to be in there as the workers' comp statute of limitations would apply. And again, I'm sorry, for an occupational disease, the statute of limitations is 3 years from when you, not just a diagnosis, but when you knew or should have known that that diagnosis was caused by work exposures. So again, by converting 7-313J into a workers' comp statute and providing a rebuttable presumption, it creates an insurable risk. It also converts the benefits from taxable benefits to non-taxable benefits. So I'm sure Mr. Adamson's going to address the efficiency of dollars going being targeted to the recipient and being received by the recipient. I think you need to factor in the tax consequences, because if we're simply paying in money and then turning over 25 to 30% of that money to the federal government, I'm not sure that's so efficient. And it also, by converting this into a workers' comp statute, it removes the battle of the doctors, which is really the cause of the delay in the workers' comp system. And so, I think it addresses that very real concern. I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Morrissey. We have some recommendations in addition to this bill. And one of them, I'll start. One of them is a simple one, which addresses the concern that we heard from the widow at our last meeting, that her health insurance was cut off once her husband passed away. 31-284B addresses health insurance, continued health insurance for public sector employees, as long as they are eligible to receive workers' comp benefits. Unfortunately, that statute references employee rather than claimant. If the statute were simply changed to say claimant instead of employee, then it would address that problem of continued health insurance for the surviving family. And with that, I will turn it over to Attorney Morrissey. You're muted, Dave. You're muted.
Sorry. Bud and I have kicked around what's being proposed and sort of brainstorming and come up with a few thoughts, which we hope will be helpful. I personally have done a lot of work under what I'm sure you're all familiar with is the Heart and Hypertension Act. And it's similar to what I think you're trying to do now. This law started in the 50s, and what it did is it gave a rebuttable presumption to certain firefighters and police officers that if they suffered hypertension or heart disease during the course of their employment, there was a rebuttable presumption that it arose out of and in the course of employment. My understanding is that the success of those claims was poor. People would smoke, they were obese, there might be family history. So there were some complaints to the legislature about how this could be fixed to effectuate what I think everybody wanted to do. In the late 60s, that rebuttable presumption was changed to an irrebuttable presumption that the job caused the hypertension or heart disease. The municipalities challenged that, and our Supreme Court said that that was unconstitutional. In that decision, however, they kind of told the legislature, here's a way to get around those problems and accomplish what you want. So what happened was in 1971, the legislature created the last version of the Heart and Hypertension Act, which said that if an employee passed a pre-employment physical showing no evidence of hypertension or heart disease, and thereafter suffered hypertension or heart disease while still an employee and met other prerequisites, both their workers' comp portion, they would be paid as if the job caused that hypertension or heart disease, and they would also be entitled to disability pension benefits as if the job caused the hypertension or heart disease. So whether the job had anything to do with it or not was completely irrelevant to whether an employee could get these benefits. The problem with that is the town of Plainfield immediately challenged that, or I should say the Travelers Insurance Company did, and said if there's no job nexus required, those benefits are not covered under our workers' comp policy. That case went to our Supreme Court and they agreed. So the big problem with this law was there was no insurance. And these towns became self-funded for all these heart and hypertension claims, including for employees as well as widows. Now, the law was repealed in 1996 for anyone hired after July 1st, 96, but all those individuals hired prior to that date are still covered, as are people who have retired and maybe gotten worse as time went on or died from heart disease, which caused their widows to then file widows benefit claims, which again are unfunded mandates which have cost the municipalities quite a bit of money. So that was the big problem with the Heart and Hypertension Act, is they did what they wanted, but it became overly costly. So we had a couple of thoughts on maybe how to correct that. So a rebuttable presumption with whatever prerequisite you might want to cause to eliminate people is a good way to do it. So if someone was a prior smoker within 5 years, or whatever language you want to put in, they might be automatically barred from getting these benefits. There may be other things you might want to put in to make it a little more difficult, but the advantage of a rebuttable presumption is it does give the municipalities some wiggle room to challenge these cases, and it's also insured. Now, I know Mr. Adamson is going to be putting on a presentation, and I read his comments, which I totally understand. There is no requirement in the law that if you create a special statute for these firefighters, that medical benefits need be a part of that. Now, I haven't done any studies on which fire departments have insurance or not. I suspect every paid fire department in the state has health insurance for their employees. They pretty much all have great insurance. So there's no reason that the medical part of this bill needs to be part of the workers' comp system. And that's a big problem. Now, the other big problem, as Bud mentioned, was when the prior woman from New Britain testified, she said there was never a problem getting the medical bills paid for her husband. Her problem was after he died, they had a family with no pension and no medical insurance. So again, if the medical problems are paid for by health insurance, and if we presume that the cancer arose out of employment, by tweaking that 284B statute, that would solve the problem of giving families who are devastated by this the health insurance that they need going forward. Again, these are just ideas that I think might save some money and might address some of Mr. Adamson's issues. Now, the other thing Mr. Adamson pointed out was you could get a life insurance policy and some long-term disability plan. The problem is a life insurance policy of $75,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 really doesn't help the family that much. Maybe if it was $1 million or something very substantial would help. But my thought was, rather than the widow's benefits be under the workers' compensation part of whatever statute you have, simply model it after the Heart and Hypertension Act that would allow for a presumption that the death arose out of employment, and that way you get a widow's benefit for those municipalities that had disability pensions or plans such as that. That may not cover every municipality, but it could be that as the primary payor and maybe workers' comp as the secondary payor. Again, just throwing out ideas. Most of these pension plans are funded, and that is not the municipality's money. That's money controlled by the pensioners. So it doesn't cost the town any more money, but obviously the contributions might have to go up. There might be actuarial adjustments that need to be made. I don't know how bad they would be for widows. There aren't that many widows, honestly, in a given year in the workers' comp system. We're talking hundreds, not thousands or any dramatic number. So I think there's ways around these issues. I know we talked about drafting a statute that we thought might cover some of these problems, which you advised us not to do. So we thought we'd just kind of throw some ideas out. I think that kind of covers what I had. The only other thing I brought up last time is perhaps limiting this benefit to only paid firefighters, which would draw the pool down to around 6,000 people, as I understand it, as opposed to 26,000 people. So again, a lot of the issues brought up as to costs by Mr. Adamson are well taken. But by my way of thinking, coverage for the employee, the person with cancer, usually isn't going to be a problem while they're still employed. The main problem is going to be indemnifying them while they're still employees and indemnifying them after they retire or die. So again, I think there's a few ideas we came up with, which hopefully are helpful.
Thank you very much. And I think we should start with some questions about that. I know I have a few questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just make one more comment. So in other words, there's different ways of spreading the risk. You know, you've got health insurance that they already have. You've got a pension that they may be able to be eligible for that pension sooner. And there's obviously workers' comp insurance and other insurance that Bill, I'm sure, will bring up. So there's different ways to spread this risk. There's different ways of limiting the exposure, and I think there's a way to coordinate all of that. I don't think it's one to the exclusion of the others.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. It's a helpful summation. I know cost is always an issue, but I do want to remind people that that can't be the primary concern, because I think we all agree that it's critical that when we ask people to serve as firefighters and they're protecting our homes and our property, it's, I believe, a community obligation to make sure that we're taking care of any exposure that they experience from doing this very dangerous work. And, you know, when a person dies on a fire because of inhalation of smoke or catching fire or not being able to get out, or a collapse of a building, you know, we understand that it's our obligation and that's considered a death in the line of duty. But this exposure to cancer is just as insidious, just as dangerous, and we have to figure out how we make sure that those families receive the kind of care and long-term support that they would have received if the death was from a more recognized and immediate cause of death because of being in that fire and suffering the consequences of it. So I think that's the challenge that we have. I do want to reinforce that while we asked you to come up with ways in which a rebuttable presumption could be written and there could be modifications of the workers' comp laws so that we could see what the possibilities are, that was not intended to suggest that formulation that you've worked on will automatically be the recommendation of this committee. Clearly, we have to have more discussion about it and greater understanding. I think the goal of this task force is to come up with the best solution for the firefighters and for their families to address, you know, our obligations. And I think we all agree we have those obligations to the firefighter community. I also want to point out that there has been raised by folks, I think very appropriately, that we still haven't addressed what do we do about volunteer fire departments. And there are so many communities that have volunteer fire departments. So that's still a very open question that we need to address and consider. And, you know, a complete set of recommendations must take that into account. I know, Vaughn, you have pointed that out to us and reminded us of that, and that is still an outstanding challenge that we have. So, we're looking at all of the ways that this could be addressed and want to come up with the best solution. And it might not be one solution, it may be a combination of solutions. I also want to say at the outset that I think we do know ways in which prevention can be not just suggested, but enforced, through legislation that could reduce the number of cancer cases. And a lot of the good suggestions have come from task force members and from documents that you sent to us that clearly need to be part of our recommendations, so that going forward, fewer firefighters actually experience cancer. That should also be a primary goal of this task force, to make sure that we're doing everything to look at ways to mitigate against people getting cancer from the job. And I appreciate that, and that I can assure you that should, I think we'll all agree that that should be part of our recommendation. Nonetheless, it leaves us with a group of people that didn't have the advantage of working under those changed circumstances that will keep them safer. So we have to have a retrospective look at what do we do for those families that and those firefighters that experienced this before those recommendations were in place. So with that, I would like to open the floor to questions, and I would hope that in this section that we really work on questions rather than, that we start with questions rather than with statement of our views, because I think getting the answers to questions will help us when we get to the point of really examining, what our perspective is, what our views are about what should be in the final recommendation. So for this section, I would ask committee members, task force members, to really focus on questions they have, things they don't understand about the presentation. So with that, I will start with the first hand I saw was Harry Aurora. Representative Aurora.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo, all your remarks especially in terms of prevention, My question and thank you, both attorneys, for that excellent presentation, and especially the history of the Hypertension Act and how it evolved over the 2 decades, as you mentioned, from its inception to its repeal. My question really is about how would the rebuttable presumption play out, both in terms of timing, as well as in terms of costs, right? Because what we're saying is, does putting a rebuttal presumption, because and with respect to ensuring that the 70%, or where there is no nexus, because there are still 70% of the cases of people who are in the firefighting profession who may have cancer where there will be no nexus, and the cause may be genetic or otherwise, and how effective the rebuttal presumption would be to ensure that those with no nexus are not in the group where the worker compensation works, whereas those with nexus are effectively or quickly get the benefits, right? So can you talk to how this rebuttable presumption really helps and keeps it fair between the municipalities and the firefighters?
I could address that.
Go ahead, Dave.
If you like. The strange thing with the Heart and Hypertension Act is it's kind of a divergent path. State employees have had a rebuttable presumption forever. They never had the irrebuttable presumption or the plain bonus legislation that municipal employees have. So to this day, there are many state employees, hazardous duty employees, that have a rebuttable presumption that hypertension or heart disease was caused by their employment. So how it works there in that sector is it's basically a prima facie case that you win. So under that law, if you pass a pre-employment physical with no hypertension or heart disease or no evidence of it, and thereafter are diagnosed with hypertension or heart disease, it's presumed that the job caused it. Now, what the state of Connecticut then does is we'll say, well, this individual was a smoker, and this individual has a family history of hypertension, and perhaps they're obese, and perhaps there's a number of other things that more probably were the causes of that hypertension or heart disease. Well, if they're able to rebut the presumption, they win. So if I have a client that's 400 pounds, is a heavy smoker, and has a family history, my odds of winning that case are pretty poor. However, if I have a different individual that wasn't a smoker, no family history, they keep in pretty good shape, and perhaps it's an idiopathic problem, they're probably going to win that case because the state won't be able to rebut it. So we win many of those, but we lose quite a few too, because there's other things that the state can bring in to rebut the presumption.
No, thank you for that very insightful answer. I think the real challenge which I am having grappling with this notion is the base rate, as I would call. If the base rate for 50-50, and we do not know that for sure, obviously there are things which we do not know for sure,
Right.
Then the idea of having a presumption would kind of really be more credible. When the base rate we are hearing, once again, from all the research available is 20, right? 20% of firefighters, a cancer diagnosis has nexus to the job. Then to say that the municipality should basically assume fault in some sense. And unlike the hypertension, it's still harder to check somebody for cancer, say, because a lot of the cancers develop at later age. They do not develop at the 20s and 30s when people join the roles, but more in 50s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And then there's also the challenge that this is also effective after people leave. So we're not only talking about a firefighter leaves at 45 and at 55 they get diagnosed with cancer, and the whole idea would be, is there a nexus during the time when they were between 25 and 45 when they fought the fires? So the rebuttable presumption really is still not, it's just weighing the scales a little more between lawyers on one side and the lawyers on the other side. But we're seeking the truth, and that's why I kind of feel that the insurance solution, which really totally bypasses the whole, that seems more thoughtful or more real, because you do not kind of weigh one side or the other, because that's not our job to say. We absolutely want to make sure in this task force that we find compensation for those who are hurt at the job as a result of nexus to the job. But we don't want to basically tip the scale if it's 20/80, or which is not clear that it is related to the job, although we have a premonition that there's a chance that it could be related to the job. So, but thank you very much I for explaining this. I'm not a lawyer myself, so I really appreciate your thoughts. I also thought that what you mentioned on the pension is much more cleaner, or much more. It makes a lot more sense that there should be a graduated guideline, so as to say, at the minimum, to provide some benefits to the families. I think that makes I'm going to read up how you've written it, but I think that made much more, was very thoughtful. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my question and my comment together there.
Thank you, Representative Aurora. Next up, we have Rick Hart.
Thanks, Senator. For the attorneys, so in your paper, I'll start with item 3. So an addendum to each individual pension plan that would allow a member to collect a pension prior to their anniversary date is permissible under state law?
Yes. The Heart and Hypertension Act, as I said, was a 2-part law. It stated that not only would they receive workers' benefits as if the injury was on the job, similar to workers' comp benefits, but also that they would be able to get a job-related disability pension, assuming they're disabled from the job, as if the job caused it. So I believe that's already passed constitutional muster under the Grover versus Manchester case, which goes back to the late 60s.
Okay, and so for item 4, you say just changing the language to read claimant, that would allow for insurance coverage to continue for widows or widowers.
Yes, this law only applies to municipal or public sector employees, by the way. For private sector, it was preempted by ERISA, and that's a whole other discussion. But the sad thing is, I think the legislature intended, probably especially, to protect widows and orphans when someone died on the job. So the scenario you mentioned earlier, where a firefighter dies at a fire scene, unless the contract in that municipality specifically provides health insurance for widows, while the widow may get workers' comp benefits, they're not going to get necessarily any health insurance because they're not the employee. The employee died. So if you changed it to the claimant is now the widow. So she would then be covered by, or he would then be covered by that law.
Okay, great. And to Representative Aurora, I don't know where you're getting your information from, but firefighters are between 200 and 150% more likely to get certain cancers. And as far as getting cancer at a later age, that's categorically false. We're finding that with testicular cancer in particular, that's a teens to 20-year-old people are getting it in their teens and 20s. But we're seeing in firefighters that they're getting testicular cancer 40, 50 years old. So it's just the opposite of what conventional wisdom would say, that it's a young person's disease. We're also getting in as far as the prevention aspect of it is concerned, with the heart and hypertension law, many things changed after 96 as far as the fire service grasping the problem of heart and hypertension, heart disease and hypertension, by modifying how they work and how they work out their diet, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing a dramatic, and the attorneys can, I'm sure, vouch for this, you're seeing a dramatic drop in that, the claims for heart and hypertension. The same changes have occurred in the fire service, where people are taking cancer in the fire service to the nth degree as far as prevention. We're doing gross decon after fires, where we have wipes on all the wagons. We're showering after fires. We're doing everything we can, from blood work to chest x-rays, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know of any, I know Bill has mentioned PET scans. I don't know of any insurance company that's going to pay for a PET scan just because you're a firefighter, unless it gets mandated by state statute. So there's a lot of information and misinformation that, we're 20% of firefighters going to get cancer. I don't want to be in that 20%, whether it's 70 or 20%. You don't want to be in that section of the populace, because nobody wants to get cancer, and it's being caused by our job, by the chemicals that are burning in your house. I just feel that we have to change this to benefit our members as well as the families. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I speak for a moment?
I did have other hands, but I know you have to jump off for a minute. So go ahead if you can keep it brief.
Yes, no, there are two different numbers being discussed here. I just want to point it out. There is a 200% increase. additional or 200% the rate. I understand that, but that still implies that the actual rate is 20%. What you're saying is that in normal people, it may be 10%, and in firefighters, it is 20%. So kind of this different ways. So I'm looking at them at all the numbers, and I think we need to clarify that it is 200% of the normal population. Normal population gets it at 10 or 12%, and hence it's 24% or 20 in the 20s. That's what the numbers. And I would really like you to give me more research if there is available, which says to the contrary. Because if you're more than 50, then the rebuttable presumption suddenly makes has more credibility. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my. And one other, I do want to repeat what Madam Chair mentioned earlier, that we do want to have a solution which will also be available to, or which can be expanded to the volunteers as well, because in the end, they're also fighting in the fire for our communities. And we cannot just right now, when we are brainstorming and thinking about this issue, just only focus on 6,000 firefighters. We have to be thinking about the entire profession to make sure we're fair to everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I appreciate you being brief. I would like to say that I agree with you. We need to, and I stated it at the outset that we need to consider volunteers. I would only suggest that we may not be able to extend the exact same solutions and recommendations for volunteers as we have for the career firefighters, but I agree that some combination of solutions has to be available to them as well. So thank you for your comments. And I just Attorney Drapeau wanted to respond to this, so let me call on you next.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of your concerns, Representative, could be addressed in the eligibility, which diagnoses would be eligible for the presumption. Certainly would be those cancers that have a stronger nexus to firefighters. Those firefighters who have developed a cancer that is not listed in the statute certainly would be free to bring a workers' comp claim without the benefit of the presumption. But I know other states have addressed this issue by listing the types of cancer that would be eligible for the presumption.
Thank you for reminding us that specific, which was part of your presentation, because I think that is critical to remember when we're considering recommendations and a sort of a package of solutions that we will recommend. Next up, I believe I saw Bill Adamson and followed by Von Dumas.
Yeah, hi. A question for the attorneys on the draft to make sure I'm understanding what was written here. It's a rebuttable presumption. Basically, it covers, based on the broad list of areas being effective, it should cover most cancers for the firefighters. And the only outs for someone that would rebut this, if I'm reading this correctly, is if they didn't have appropriate physical, they're involved with tobacco, and they have to have been a firefighter for 5 years. Those are the criteria, correct?
Yes, and just so you know, Bill, I mean, I wasn't part of the committee that drafted 7-3 through 313J. I don't know why I'm having a hard time saying that. But clearly a lot of thought went into drafting that bill. And that's why I simply borrowed the language from that bill. But yes, that's my reading of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, while it's rebuttable, I would think that this would cover the majority of cancers out there. And I would point out that at least the stats that we've seen that 4 out of 5 cancers that would come to firefighters are not related to the job, only 20%. Now, no one wants anybody to get cancer. We certainly don't want our firefighters to get cancer. But, there's just a significant number of cancers out there. And I've read recently that a third of the US population will at some point in their lives get cancer. So, this is something affecting all of us. And the fact that the firefighters have accelerated exposure, Mr. Hart talked about, testicle cancer and all that, the incidence going to come in young people. That's an example of something that's of great concern. And, why we're obviously all here trying to figure out the best method of making sure that our brave individuals in the fire industry are taken care of appropriately.
I do have a question about the answer you received, Bill. I want to make sure I understand it because, and I apologize, I need to go back and read it more closely. I just got your presentation before this meeting, but I thought you were saying that it would be limited to the list of cancers, and you suggested, Bill, that the list of cancers was so expansive that it would cover most cancers. Is that the case?
Oh, right, because the way it's written, it doesn't list the cancers. It doesn't say testicle cancer, it doesn't say mesothelioma, whatever. It says areas affecting, different parts of the body. And that really encompasses, most parts of the body. So I'm saying it's very broad coverage. And, just recognize when it's very broad coverage, it certainly has a big impact to the cost.
Thank you for the clarification.
I mean, in some respects, it's closer to strict liability for the comp world than other statutes where it's rebuttable, but there's a lot more teeth in it on the rebutting. This is pretty straightforward. Bud points out it takes your medical expert versus someone else's medical expert, arguing in front of whatever the body that decides is. It's pretty straightforward. The attempt here is obvious to make it automatic, but that's what it does, from what I can tell. But it does mean it's going to cover the majority of cancers, some of which are firefighter industry costs, some just, because we're all humans that get cancer. But, my point was that making sure I understood it was that has a higher cost than some of the other cancer statutes out there. They're a lot more limited in scope.
My second question about the comments that were made is you mentioned that I address this to Attorney DePro or Morrissey, but it was mentioned that the only out or the only way for a municipality to disprove a work relationship or the nexus is if they were involved with tobacco or 5 years out. I also wanted to ask, I thought I heard you say that family history would also be a consideration.
I believe I said that, but I was talking about this presumption now in place for certain state employees. The state's allowed to bring up anything that they want that might rebut the presumption. I think what Bud did is just wrote what the legislature had already listed as I think just the two things that can rebut the presumption.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Sure. Next, I saw Von Dumas. We can't hear you. You're still muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. That item number one of recommendations of only providing coverage for career firefighters in the state is going to be a huge issue. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Connecticut State Firefighter Association. So the National Volunteer Fire Council has done some research, and there's 22 states across the nation who provide coverage to volunteer firefighters in their states. And my question is, I emailed the link out actually to the email chain that for the meeting announcement. Have the attorneys looked into any of these other states that provide coverage to volunteers and the methods or means that they're doing that? And I will follow up with that as well before the next meeting to take a look at some of those states and see what I can find out, but they may have stronger resources than I do. with counselors or lawyers in their municipal lawyers in those states.
Vaughn, I would just suggest that we have another resource to look at other states, and that is our brands. Also, that's another resource that, you know, they're very accustomed to looking at other states and what they provide. So I would encourage John to look at that as well.
Yeah, you kind of broke up a little bit, but I got the gist of what you're saying, that you're going to encourage them to do it, and I'll take a look as well to see what I can find out. Thank you.
I was encouraging John Moran from OLR to look at that as well, because that's part of their wheelhouse. That's what they do on a regular basis. So, but also the attorneys, do you want to respond to that at all?
I can. I mean, it was probably my attempt at playing politician a bit, in that I guess I was thinking of the cost, especially if you're going to have the municipalities' health insurance pay for cancer bills, which they're already paying for, as opposed to workers' comp. You wouldn't have that same resource with volunteer firefighters. And again, I'm just thinking cost-wise, maybe that's outside of what I should be addressing. That's really your area. But no, I did not check other states. I did not. No. I don't know if Bud did.
And I do want to say, Vaughn, how much I know I've recognized you every time I brought the subject up, because I want to ensure that we realize that this is a big part of the problem that we have to look at. You know, since being involved, I'm aware in my own district, I have two towns that rely heavily on volunteer fire departments. Even where in Danbury we have a big fire department and career firefighters, we also heavily depend on those volunteers as well. So, you know, we have, I don't know, 6 or 7 volunteer fire departments around the city of Danbury. So I really do appreciate what you're saying, and just want to assure you that that's not been lost on us.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I'm the beneficiary of a pension program from a municipal department that I worked for and retired from. So I understand the career side of it, but I also understand the volunteer side of it, being a volunteer fire chief. You know, fires don't burn any differently because you're a volunteer town versus a career town. And many, high percentage of volunteer fire departments across the state mutual aid and assist career departments when they have large events or large scale fires. So, you know, they could be very well called into a town with a career municipal fire department as a volunteer to help suppress that fire and be exposed as well. So I appreciate you looking at it and limiting the discrimination on the volunteer side. Thank you.
And I do know that New York has a special statute for volunteer firefighters, and I believe they have a $25,000 lump sum payment per diagnosis for volunteer firefighters, but I don't know how the other states operate.
Great. I do see Rick Hart's hand is up.
For a point of clarification for Bill, I was part of the working group that established the cancer study, and we took a body system approach as opposed to individual cancers, so it was all encompassing. So that was the thought process of the bipartisan group that came up with that statute.
Thank you, Rick, for clarifying that. Other hands?
I guess you don't see my hand, but it is raised, Senator Kushner.
You know what? I have to tell you this, that it's hard to see on the white background. So but I'm sorry for that.
That's okay. That's fine. You know, Zoom has this thing going. Just wanted to ditto, you know, what Mr. Dumas was just stating. I'm in full support of all firefighters, you know, being covered. I too know a lot of volunteer firefighters, and I definitely agree. The fire doesn't care whether you're working for the city, the town, or if you're volunteering. I think it's, you know, to be commended, the volunteer firefighters that go out and do this without the pay, but taking the same risks as firefighters who are getting paid very well great benefits and a pension. So I just wanted to put that on the record because I certainly do support that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Porter. I want to also talk a little bit in this context about the need to have some kind of uniform reporting system for fire departments to document when their firefighters go out and are fighting a fire. There are a lot of our fire departments, volunteer and career, they handle all kinds of problems in our cities and our towns, well beyond fighting fires. And, I think that's important to acknowledge. We have, we have situations where there are medical emergencies and it's the fire department that responds. We have, car accidents and they're there with the jaws of life. And, there's so many important functions that firefighters address in keeping our community safe beyond fires. And so it would seem to me one helpful way to actually address, the cause of getting cancer would be to be sure that we have a process by which we're uniformly documenting those fires that do occur and the firefighters that are sent on those calls. And I'm just curious, I see Rick shot his hand up right away. So maybe you can illuminate all of us on this issue. So Rick, I lost track of where you are, Rick, but you're down there. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the UPFFA has a fire exposure report that lists or documents personnel on scene and the products of combustion or the hazardous materials that they've been exposed to or potentially exposed to. Also, in right now, we use Firehouse brand software, which is going to become obsolete by the end of the year. And the software platform that we're going to named First Do has an extensive reporting feature where all members that responded to an incident are able to fill out an exposure report form, and that's kept on the cloud, so it's there forever, so that if there is documentation as to response to fires or to hazardous materials events, they're able to access that information and provide that to their physician or to the workers' comp commissioner. The UPFFA forms are hard copies, so they're trying to figure out a way to get that electronically, so we could have a repository for all the exposure report forms. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. And so then that I see that Vaughn has his hand up. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just like what Chief Hart has mentioned about software. A lot of changes in software have been upgraded. For example, my department, we now have ESO, which we have a section to identify who was directly involved in suppression and may have been exposed versus somebody who would maybe a pump engineer that was not at risk at the time of the incident. But there are 3 forms that we've identified in the state so far for exposure forms for things like chemicals or hazardous materials and cancer-causing carcinogens. We're trying to minimize that to be one PDF fillable form that you can get off either the commission's website through Jeff Morissette, but I also understand where members of UPFFA or IFL-CIO or a volunteer organization may have their own forms or documents to submit through those types of union environments. But I think we should concentrate, us as a fire organization, career and volunteer, working with Jeff Morissette to consolidate these forms and make one general form that would cover all aspects of what UPFFA may want notified of, or IFL-CIO, or the state through the Commission of Fire Prevention and Control what exposures they want reported or types of exposures or the data that they want to collect to document the exposure. We should narrow that down. There's just too many forms for us in the fire service, EMS, to fill out. So if we can narrow that down to one form statewide, I think that that would be a good goal for the subcommittee that both Rick Hart and I serve on, to get together with Jeff Marset and just make one form that is agreeable, both legislatively and through the commission.
I appreciate that. And I think working on that together and perhaps including that in our recommendations might also provide us with the ability to have better data about, how many people are being impacted. Because, what I've heard previously, it's very hard to get hard data, in terms of exposure. So I appreciate that. I hope that we can make sure that process moves forward, that it's both uniform reporting, but also done in a way that it's searchable data that can be reviewed and studied, so that it makes it a little easier to report and to establish the very specific numbers of people that have been exposed and what they're exposed to. So I appreciate that. That's something we need to include. I don't see any other hands. Are there any other questions, or if not questions, is there anyone who would like to comment on the report before we move on in the agenda? Representative Porter. Yeah, I saw that right away.
I just really wanted to say thank you for the presentation and for the information. I too have been going over it. I didn't have a chance to really delve into it, but the explanations and the summaries brought some clarity on some of the questions that came up, and other questions were already asked. So I think I'm in a good place as far as understanding what the recommendations are. And I'm just looking forward to expanding on the recommendations so we can kind of drill down and get to where we need to be. So just thank you both for your time on this and the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Porter. And I would also like to encourage our two attorneys who work with workers' comp and who've worked on this presentation to think about if there's feedback that you got from the conversation that could be, could modify the work you've already done to maybe hone in on some of the issues that have been raised, because I think that will be helpful to us. And we would look forward to hearing back from you on, modifications that you might have made to this approach that you've laid out. So I agree. Thank you so much, because I know you haven't cleared up all of the confusion about workers' comp, but you've gone a long way to putting forward a cohesive approach that I think can be considered by this task force. I have one more comment, but I'll wait until I hear from Rick Hart. It might change my comment. Chief Hart.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kushner. As far as we're concerned, if item 3 and 4 on the recommendations from the attorneys can be accomplished, that pretty much addresses our concerns. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thanks.
Thank you. And the comment I was going to make is that I think for all of us, when we're looking at solutions, we need to make sure that we're addressing solutions that will meet the challenges of the firefighters and the families that are experiencing this. And one of my concerns about some of the things I've heard, what I totally embrace the idea of prevention, I'm concerned that there are still those that we have an obligation to help, that, we're not the beneficiaries of the new approaches to firefighting and to preventing cancer. I also am concerned about products that might be out there that really don't address the breadth of the challenges that are faced by the family. You know, pot of money might be helpful, but even like $25,000 in the face of bills for cancer and for, you know, the lives of the families that are left behind after a death, it's not very much money in the context of losing a life. And so, you know, I think as a task force, we really have to be, you know, it's nice to put forward solutions that might say, okay, well, we tried and we made a little step forward. But I think at least at this point in developing our report and recommendations, we should be really focused on, you know, real solutions that solve the broadest approach to solving the problems faced by these families. And you know, that's our, I think that's our mission and our chart. You know, getting it through the legislature is a whole nother issue. But without our guidance of what it would take to really help these families, I think that, you know, we won't have anywhere to even begin the discussion in the legislature. So that's my hope, that as a task force, we can approach it in that way. So having said that, if there are no more comments on that item on the agenda, then I would like to move to the presentation. And Bill, I don't know if you expect it to be on the agenda in this way as a presentation. I know you asked for an opportunity to address your concerns, and so, you know, we're flexible. We leave it to you how you approach this. So next up, I have Bill. You're muted.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, presentation, I mean, I tried to summarize at least my thoughts, and I tried to do it succinctly. And I wanted to just make sure that the committee was considering all options, because I think that's very important here. And I do believe there's a least cost approach from the standpoint, if the state were to mandate purchase of critical illness and long-term disability insurance for the fire industry and require it as a quid pro quo minimum amount of cancer prevention activities, including regular testing, and that the scans would have to be paid for that were mentioned earlier, not go to health insurance where they might deny it, that moves the ball forward significantly. As I listen, since we've been having these discussions about, you know, what's needed. I mean, obviously medical is needed, reimbursement for deductibles, copay, sick time and use of vacation was mentioned. There's a resolution there, wage replacement, and then a death benefit. As I pointed out, since we began talking, comp is the most expensive. I think that a lot more could be done on the prevention side with more funding. Not being left to the, you know, just the obvious ones like wiping down the truck, you know, taking a shower, doing things at the fire ground to try to, you know, detox, what have you. Yeah, I think all that's very important. More can be done. You still have fire trucks on the scene blowing out exhaust with the firefighters standing right there breathing the fumes, which is not good. I pointed out that, you know, what a critical illness policy can do, a lot higher limits can be purchased. It's just a matter of how much people want to spend. But the costs are, you know, under $300 per firefighter. Because my involvement in other states and, you know, similar cancer were in Arizona, it's rebuttable, but basically covers most cancers like this will, as written and presented earlier. You know, that's probably around $2,700 a firefighter for 6,000 firefighters. That's $16 million. And that's not just one time, that's every year. You know, that's $82 million over 5 years if the rates stayed the same. It's a lot of money. And I look at, you know, what else could be done for the benefit of firefighters. You know, I was involved with some people that were involved with the Milwaukee Fire Department, and bear with me on this. The chief there asked this guy's a physical therapist, why is it that his firefighters in Milwaukee department took 9 months to come back from a shoulder injury, and in the NFL it takes 3 months? And so they analyze it, and basically in the NFL, the doctors there at the stadium, they do an MRI, and the best doctors decide, is it physical therapy, do they have surgery the next day? And so this individual developed a program that he sells to municipalities that basically says, for first responders, we'll get NFL treatment. And city of Milwaukee was the first one. What it meant was, and I've got a couple claims where we've got second and third surgeries on people for knees, what have you, that didn't go right. You don't see people get multiple surgeries in the NFL for normally for an injury. Okay, they get it right the first time. So what he's done is he's worked with the best physicians in each state and get them to agree that if you're part of his program, which costs $229 a firefighter, that your firefighters get in within 48 hours to see those doctors and get into surgery if they need it. What it's done for Milwaukee, it saved them $1 million a year in overtime. But more importantly, it gets the best treatment for firefighters. This is outside of cancer. Again, I'm taking it somewhere. We should be getting the best medical care for firefighters to begin with. So they have the service. The service has been expanded to now that if you're in this thing called Rebound at $229 a firefighter, you also get access to Cancer Centers of America, and they guarantee you'll get in within 48 hours to either get treatment or get surgery. So as we know, cancer spreads. The sooner you get surgery, if that's what they're going to do, the better off you are. That's a program that costs some money, $229 a firefighter. And for some bigger departments or others, it probably saves in overtime that it pays for itself. But, again, this example where money could be diverted to get firefighters better coverage, and if they do get cancer, quicker. But, so there's a lot more than just, put it in comp. That may be as simple because that's what people are used to. And I really think that, again, this is about providing the broadest care one can provide. I think the majority of the benefits that one would get in comp through other mechanisms, because the cost is not is annual, not front-ended like comp. And I think that frees up money to do more on the prevention side, more extensive, get the kind of testing that healthcare maybe entities won't pay for, but if it's paid for through tax dollars, that's a good thing. And maybe things like Rebound, where they get not only instant into Cancer Centers of America if they do get cancer, they also get the best surgeons in the state. I mean, to me, it's all about providing more and better support for our firefighters. So that's what I endeavored to do in this, just to summarize my thoughts as an alternative. And, there can be a lot of permutations of that. But my gut reaction is that we can provide comparable benefits to comp at a lesser cost, and that will free up money for prevention and free up money for other things for our firefighters.
Thank you, Bill. I think what you've raised gives us a lot to think about. And also, I would suggest that it may be approaches that we should be insisting in workers' comp systems, because, we heard testimonies from firefighters who, because they were in the workers' comp system and there was so much delay because of the war of the doctors that was talked about earlier and the whole process of workers' comp, there were such long delays. And now I'm talking about the folks who have injuries, that they were forced to go back to work before they were really better. And that compounded the injuries. And they needed, in some cases, were totally disabled at some point, or needed more surgeries because the problem wasn't addressed in a timely basis. And I think, that's something really important that we all look at for all kinds of injuries that workers face on the job. And it's not just firefighters, it's any kind of worker who suffers through that lengthy procedure. I understand the reasons for appeals. I understand the reasons why we need to build into the system, a process by which claims can be disputed, but at the same time, it does, for the valid cases, it puts people in a position where they often get sicker because it didn't get addressed quickly enough. And so I appreciate what you're saying and something really to think about. Are there any other comments on regarding what Bill just shared with us or questions? Attorney, but I saw Robin. Let me go to Representative Porter. She had her hand up first, and then Attorney Marcy.
I saw Attorney Marcy go up, so I put mine down. Yeah, I was going to yield to him. But thank you, Senator Kushner. Just wondering, I'm looking at where you talk about the various products that are on the market. Do we have an instance or an example of anyone that is currently doing this like on their own, per se? Like maybe, do you have firefighters that actually have additional policies? You have any kind of data on that?
Well, I mean, it's as I mentioned, Florida moved to remove cancer from comp, and they buy these critical illness policies, and they have mandate disability, and it covers the co-pays and the deductibles. And I heard in our testimony earlier about firefighters shouldn't have to use, if it wasn't in comp, they shouldn't have to use sick days and vacation times. That can be just mandated by statute, and that can be either insured on short-term disability or can be run as a just paid for by the various departments depending on their size and their desires.
Okay, and I'm just thinking of the cost for the firefighters, because I know you gave an example of 25,000, 75,000 death benefit, and earlier in the conversation we said that's not nearly enough. So I think if you don't mind, I would like to see more realistic numbers for us to look at as far as, the policy amount that would pay out and the amount that the firefighters would have to pay in for the benefit.
What limit are you guys looking for?
Let's talk about that. What do we think would be a reasonable limit? I heard somebody say $1 million, 500,000.
Well, I would think that you come up with a realistic number, but I would like to think that our firefighters are also buying life insurance or having life insurance provided that protects them and their family, because there are a certain probability that one dies outside of work. And then are the families left destitute because they didn't buy didn't buy life insurance? I mean, I'm an insurance guy, so obviously I think like that. But when I had my first child and I was making $18,000 a year, I still went and bought 150, 200,000 to start. Bought some for my wife, and I built from there. And so it's about not just concerned about on the job injuries. If you're going to protect your family, you should be checking for all potential.
Right, I agree with that. I do know that that's not necessarily the case. So that is the concern for the folks that don't have life insurance policies or no extra coverage outside of what the employer is offering. I had another question and it just escaped me. So I am going to yield to Mr. Adamson and come back if it comes back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
One comment, when we met last time, I had asked the question, is group insurance provided? And I think Rick Hart mentioned that most of the firefighters, at least on the career guys and gals, they provide some sort of life insurance. I guess my question is an affordability issue. Should there be more life insurance provided outside of what we're trying to establish to compare with comp? If there is that affordability issue, then there should be more dollars pushed towards buying group life for all the firefighters that covers them not just on the job but outside the job, because you can get in an auto accident driving to the store and have bad results. We see that.
Yeah, I think my other concern, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Adams.
That's just a thought.
Okay, yeah, and I think the last thing that is a concern is, when you put these claims in and you file them, what is the, and you are eligible, the payout, that would be something that if there's any data, I don't know if there's data to support that, but that is a concern. Who would get approved, right, in their time of need?
Well, again, the way the policy is written, it's upon diagnosis, they get paid immediately.
All right, thank you for that. I missed that. And that'll be it for me right now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to go back to Chief Hart. Oh, you have your hand up anyway. I wanted you to maybe address that question of life insurance and departments that you're aware of around the state that do purchase life insurance. I'd be interested in knowing if you know, or if you can find out and come back to us with a sort of an analysis of what generally is the benefit that is covered by life insurance, and does that life insurance also include in it, does that address the need for continued medical insurance for the families? Go ahead, Rick.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, the life insurance that I'm aware of, in Waterbury, I believe it's $30,000, and we contribute to that. It's minimal. It's like, I think it's like $5 or $6 a week for that coverage. And there are a lot of, like, the Acme, what's the one with the duck? I don't know, the insurance company.
Aflac, that's what we have for paid leave, Aflac.
That means that their advertising is effective, even though you couldn't remember the name, you remember the duck.
Yeah, they've come out with critical illness insurance that they offer through Aflac that firefighters can purchase individually. I know the Police and Firemen's Association, which is an insurance company out of Indianapolis that a lot of departments have. They have a critical illness policy that can be purchased. But my question to Bill is, are you advocating that the firefighters pay for this disability insurance or the municipalities? Because
it would be either the fire district, the muni would be paying for it.
okay, so I'm playing devil's advocate. I can hear CCM screaming unfunded mandate all day long with this. So that's going to be a hurdle that we'd have to overcome.
Well, if the cancer presumption is broadened to cover most cancers, that's another unfunded one as well. And it's a significantly more cost over time than insuring it where you got the law large numbers working for you. I mean, you can be unlucky in a muni and get 2 bad death cases, and they cost a lot of money, and you're on the hook for a long period of time. I've got one that I think I mentioned before, where guy was in remission, looked good, and a couple years later came back, and it's $15,000 a month for life. And whatever we charged the year of that policy where he was diagnosed, that's the policy that pays. We wouldn't have been unable to forecast that kind of cost escalation in the cost of treating cancer.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's going to be a challenge.
Health insurers can rate every year. What they do is they look at their losses for 2021 and say, we're going to need X amount of money in 22. And yeah, there's some regulatory hurdles sometimes to overcome, but if they've got the data, they're able to react a lot quicker. Your policy's out the window, and forever you've got that exposure. And that's why people have to be very conservative in their rating approach to that, because you got it for 7, 8, 10 years, and you got one shot at getting a dollar premium to cover losses and expenses.
Well, one benefit, I guess, Governor Lamont just lowered workers' comp rates again, so at least it's going in the right direction.
Depends on your point of view.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Hart. Are there any other hands at this time? I don't see any other hands at this time. Oh, Vaughn, yes.
Regarding the line of duty.
I have to point out, you have that white background also. Just so you all know, if you have a white background, raise your hand and wave it, because I can't see the little hands in the corner.
Just
Go ahead, Vaughn.
As a reminder, well, first I will say that my volunteer fire department, we do purchase a supplemental insurance policy because we just feel that it's not enough coverage that we have from the municipality should be a line of duty injury. And then some of the things are restricted. For example, we're not covered by the municipality if somebody gets hurt while maintaining a fire apparatus or training. So we have our own policy for that. But also under the state portion of this, once this is adopted to be recognized, the CSFA does a life insurance policy for line of duty deaths as well, and that's state funded. There's a budgeted number that at the end of the year it's divided up between the number of unfortunate line of duty deaths. So it's not like there's a guaranteed 50,000 per person. It's a single number that's a line item that we'd have to divide up if there is a death that's considered line of duty death, and it's divided amongst those family recipients of that money. But to receive that, the departments have to be members of the CSFA and pay dues or a subscription fee annually, which is minimal. They just changed it in September, and I was looking online to see if it was changed yet, and it wasn't. But it's each department would have to pay. I think it's $65 a year for that coverage, and individuals such as chiefs and training officers that have other duties other than firefighting. There's a nominal fee. I think that's $35 per person. And that also covers for other injuries if they get injured in line of duty or if they get permanently disabled for the rest of their lives due to something that occurred in line of duty. So there is that avenue as well that has a coverage. And once I get the updated policy information or the cost associated and what the line item is on the budget, I'll forward that out to that email chain as well.
And Vaughn, do you have a sense of what the typical payment has been it would be over the last, if you could look at the last several years and tell us what families received as a payment, that would be helpful.
Yeah. We publish annually in our annual book in September, the number of families who receive benefits, whether they're total disability, permanent disability, death. So I can get those books or that documents from the last, 3 years documentation?
That would be great.
I can get that as well.
Okay. Now I truly don't see any other hands. So I will go, going back to the agenda, I do want to remind folks that there is another meeting scheduled, and I'm just looking at my calendar, but off the top of my head, I believe that is February 1st. Is that correct? Does everybody have that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we will convene on Tuesday, February 1st at 12 noon. And with that, I would like to thank everyone who participated in this meeting. And also thank you for the comments, the written comments that you've sent in to Devin Avshalom. I want to thank our clerk because he has gotten those comments circulated, and I appreciate all of you, the time you're putting in. I think it's really critical to us being in a position to issue a report with recommendations that will move us forward in this coming session to really address these needs. I want to underscore how much I have heard from all of you that this is something you're passionate about. You believe that we do have an obligation as a state and in our municipalities to protect and take care of the people that have served us and that will serve us in the future. And I think that's sort of the mission of our task force. And I appreciate how much you're all dedicated to that goal. So with that, those are my closing remarks. Representative Porter, would you like to make closing remarks?
I just thank you again. Looking forward to our February 1st meeting as we wind down and get to the nuts and bolts of it. So thank you to the attorneys once again, Morrissey and Draper, for your presentation, and also for what you presented, Mr. Addison. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I know that Representative Aurora was, as we all heard, in a car, and I believe he's not in a zone where he can get a signal. So we will forego his closing remarks. and look forward to seeing you all on February 1st. Thank you much for being here today. And with that, I would adjourn this meeting of the task force.